what gives you the most pleasure, you give the most momentum to, because it stirs up, it triggers more emotions in you than anything else you would do without pleasure. And so you end up attracting the results of what gives you the most pleasure. You end up creating the life based on the version of yourself that's only doing those things that are giving you pleasure, because you're giving it more value than anything else. What gives you more pleasure, you're sharing more of your energy, you're giving it more value, and as such you're also giving it your creation energy, which you use to create your life. You know, it's very similar to fear. The things you fear, you actually, with intensity for a prolonged period, you actually end up attracting. If you fear something happening with so much intensity for a long time, you end up creating it. If you fear something not happening, it does not happen, because whatever you fear, fear and pleasure are one of the most potent forms of emotions, one of the most potent energies, and they're also one of the most primal energies and emotions. And so whatever is pleasing you, whatever you fear, you're sharing with it so much of your value, you're sharing with it so much of your life force, your creation energy, which you actually use to create. An oversimplified explanation or example would be that if you're doing something that's giving you so much pleasure, you end up creating the life based on the version of yourself that's only doing this thing. You end up attracting the results based on whatever that thing, based on the results that thing which gives you pleasure is going to produce, if you know what I mean, if that makes sense. Even if you're working devotedly and devotionally with commitment on something that on your calling, on your purpose, even if you're working towards those things with commitment and devotion, and you're really putting in the effort, but they're not giving you any pleasure, then it would be so hard to attract the results based on this thing, based on those actions you're taking, which is working devotedly on something that is towards your purpose. But rather you're gonna end up attracting the results based on what gives you, based on the things that are giving you pleasure. Even if you're doing it, if you're doing those things for less amount of time, for less periods than actually working devotedly on what you wish to create in life. Because if you're working without pleasure on something, you're not really giving it that much energy. You're giving it your time energy, you're giving it, effort energy, but pleasure is more potent than those two forms of energy, than those two emotions. And so you end up attracting the results based on the version of yourself that's only indulging in those things that are giving you pleasure. So imagine whatever are the things that are actually giving you pleasure, and imagine if you're only a version of yourself that's doing those things, how would your life look like? And that's why you end up that's how you end up attracting results, experiences that resembles the things that gives you pleasure. And that's why your purpose, your calling has to be your pleasure. You have to find a way. You have to reach to a state, it's a reachable state that you get to, in which your calling, in which your purpose is the thing you need for pleasure. And so you don't need to indulge in cheap, instant dopamine hacks to feel good every now and then, all the time. But rather it's your purpose, your calling in within itself that's giving you pleasure, or more so, it's your connection to your truth, your connection to the mystical, your connection to the divine, your connection to the infinite is the thing that's giving you pleasure. Because then you would be giving value and energy to something of the highest frequency, to the highest frequency in existence. And so you automatically align with your desires, you automatically align with the best version, with the most joyful version, with the highest frequency version of yourself. But one of those things has to be your pleasure. It cannot be in external things. You cannot always rely on external things to get pleasure, and external cheap dopamine hacks to get pleasure. But once your purpose or your calling or your connection to the mystical, to the infinite is your pleasure, you end up attracting the results based on that version of yourself. Because now you're giving so much value and energy to that version of yourself, to that thing, and that thing is of high frequency. Or that thing, if it's your purpose, it's your purpose, it's the thing you wish to create, and it's created. And how do you do that? Perhaps is the question. And mainly to me, I find that there are two good ways to get to that state, to reach to that state. One, and probably it's the more common approach, is dopamine detox. As cliche as it might sound, it really works. Imagine this for a second. Imagine that you got isolated in a room, in an empty room, in a completely empty room for a whole day, and you have nothing. And let's assume you can't even exercise or meditate, for starters, and you have nothing but water, and you have to spend the whole day in that room without doing anything. You can just sit there in silence. Imagine that for a second, and imagine how would your pleasure transform through that experience. After a few hours, you would wish that you were able to meditate. You're gonna start wishing that you can just exercise, that you can even do the most strenuous of work, build something, work on your project. You would wish you had a notebook to write down your plans, to write down the framework for your project, or for your whatever you're trying to create, your creative ideas. You would wish you had a notebook to journal down your thoughts, to do something. You would wish you could meditate. You would wish you had that book to read. You would wish for anything, and that at that moment becomes your pleasure. You would wish for the most bland of food, even to feel good. Although if you were not in that situation, you would not think twice about whether you would eat that bland food, or you would completely be neglecting any of those things. You would not want to meditate, you would not want to read a book, eat bland healthy food, or exercise or work out, or any of those things, because you have your phone and you have the plethora of other instant dopamine release activities. And that's what dopamine detox does to you, to your system. If you gradually start decreasing your phone time, your watch time, your screen time, your TV time, your your series, your movies time, your external pleasure experiences time, the frequency of how much you indulge in this or that, in drinking, or indulging in other addictions, or any of those things. If you gradually start decreasing those things, you're gonna find that your body is starting to seek out, is starting to desire other things. Why don't I catch that book? Why don't I go for that run? Why don't you exercise? If you're just sitting there and you're limiting your phone time, your screen time, now it's done and you have nothing else to do, you're gonna start wishing for those other things, and you're gonna start actually doing those things, and then you're gonna start to shift your your pleasure system. You're gonna start feeling pleasure from those things. The more you do them, the more your brain is gonna realize, the more you are gonna realize that, well, I feel pleasure from doing those things. Why don't I double down? Why don't I go in more, go all in for that thing, because that's what I actually want to be doing. And that's how dopamine detox transforms your pleasure system. The other thing is connecting to your true self. When you connect your true self, which also means you connect your true self-worth, to your true worth, to your true value, to your infinite aspect, you won't need to rely on external dopamine hacks to cope, because the less things you have to cope. When you connect to your true self, you're not that much bothered by external stuff that's happening in your life. You're no longer identified that deeply with the things that have hurt you in the past, the things that are painful in your present, or you're not even attached to how worried you are about your future. You're just connected. You know your true worth. You know that you are part of the infinite, that you are an extension of source, and you could do anything, you could have anything, you could be anyone. Yes, if you're not able to see it in your external, if you're not able to decrease the amount of things that you need to cope with in your external reality, if it's so painful, there's nothing you could do about. But that does not mean that you cannot make it a reality in your mind, that you cannot tune into that frequency, in which you're not bound by those problems, by those external problems. You're not bound whatsoever by your external reality, by the outcomes of anything. And you start feeling elevated. And when you feel elevated, you elevate your frequency. You're in high frequencies, you're in high vibrations. Most of the time, you wouldn't need to cope. You won't need to spend so much screen time. You won't need to waste your time on this or that, but rather you're gonna find it within yourself to actually do the things that matter to you, and you're gonna start feeling pleasure from doing those things. And whether you do that, you know, you could reach that state even through meditation. You could connect your true self through meditation, you know, but also meditation is a form of dopamine detox, because you're forced to just sit there with your mind, with your profound contemplation. But you're just sitting there, you're not relying on anything external. You know, even imagine that example in which you're isolated in that room. Even your imagination is going to be pleasurable. Even your imagination is going to be of interest to you. So even if you're able to reach a state in which your pleasure, you feel more pleasure from imagining your dream reality, from living through it in your mind, from planning it out in your mind. Yes, it's not the optimum state, because but it's better than being reliant on pleasure with external things, because now you're giving it that more momentum. You're giving this thought, this emotion of your future reality more momentum and more energy. You're giving it more value, and as such, you're sharing your creation energy with it, and now you're gonna be creating that. But have your pleasure, have your purpose, your calling be your pleasure. Have your connection to yourself be your pleasure. And in all honesty, it's actually really pleasurable. When you meditate and you get past that initial phase of feeling it's unbearable to just sit down with yourself, it really becomes pleasurable. The things you feel in meditation, the things you realize in meditation, it's pleasure. It's the highest form of pleasure. There were many times I experienced an unequivalent high through meditating, not like anything else. You come out from meditation feeling weird, you know, to say the least. And there are states in which you could access, you start seeing things barely, you know, depending, but that's not the point. But it's actually pleasurable if you allow it to be, if you let yourself test it out. And so you have to find a way, you have to reach a state in which you're able to feel pleasure through your dream reality, through yourself, through being your most authentic self, whether it's because you're acting towards your calling, or you're just, you know, not doing external things that you don't really align with, that your mentality does not really, your mind does not really seek out, but you're just doing for the pleasure. You're just doing because to avoid your reality, to cope with whatever is happening in your life, or happened, or is gonna happen in your life. That's your most authentic self. And if you find a way, if you reach to that state in which that becomes your pleasure, your true self becomes your pleasure, then you are actually giving that thing your creation energy. Then you are actually in the process of creating that dream reality of yours. Thank you so much for tuning into another video by AF's Conscious Frequency. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, because it helps me so much, and it helps this video find its way to many more others who might actually need it.